Good morning. See what happens when you don't have your co-host with you. You can't do three things at once. Bex and Teresa having turkey hangover today. So I wanted to say I hope you all had a great Thanksgiving. Welcome to Spirit Sessions Review of the Life. And we're so happy to welcome back our friend, Robyn Mcclendon. She's the multi-talented woman. She's an artist, a healer. She does all sorts of retreats. She is now in a series, Cracking the Ascension Code. So please welcome Robyn, and please share this out. And also, if you have a chance, comment, tell us where you're from, and I'll try to respond to you. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Robyn, can you give us just a little bit of a DIY on you for those people who haven't seen you before and don't know you as well as we do?
Yes, well, thank you first for having me on the show. I always love coming and hanging out with you all over here on Spirit Sessions, and so it's a fun place to always come back to. So thank you. I have been probably at this for a long time, like many of us. My background is actually in archaeology and anthropology. So basically that's what I've studied. But, as I've always been a working artist, and a lot of the work I do is about telling our stories visually. And it comes out of my studies of anthropology and archaeology, where you look at textual materials, found objects, and you start putting the stories together of these lost cultures based upon things, and that's where the storylines come from. A lot of times when we're not coming at it from that place and we're just like studying history or studying sites, we're reading it, right? But we're reading stories that other people actually created from the things that they found, and then with other types of dating and things like that, create a storyline. And I like to remind my tribe and my followers that, we all have a story. And so I created something years ago that I called art mythos, which is art, which would be visual relationships or sound, dance. All of this is the arts. It's right brain. When we say art, people immediately think paintings and things like that. But really, it's really referencing the right brain. Like if we say organization, we immediately think left brain. So it's about looking at the right brain's relationship to our environment and then telling our stories. Because one of the many things that really differentiate us as human beings is that we individualize and we label things, we name things. Witness the very first thing that Adam did in the Garden of Eden, right? He started naming things. He started saying the names of animals and trees and things. So we have a tendency to name things. And so my work is really about encouraging us all to find our stories, tell them. And that's normally wrapped up in what our passions are, what we've come here to do in this lifetime, etc. So that's a big part of the work that I do. And so as a Reiki master of 30 plus years, and as I said, as an anthropologist, a lot of this weaves its way together into stories about healing and about empowerment. Yeah.
It's amazing that people's perspective shapes their thoughts, because everybody, when they look at a piece of art, they see different things. And I think that's a lot about what we see and how we interpret things in history, how the stories touch our own hearts. They can see little parts in it. You're doing this series, Cracking the Ascension Code. And could you explain, because a lot of what we do here on Spirit Sessions is take those buzzwords and kind of break them down so everyone can understand them. I want to know what your perspective is. What is ascension to you?
Yes, that's a good question, because the reason that I was even invited onto this panel that has been put together by Alexis Brooks, who, and many of your followers would know her. She's very prominent in the conscious community. She's written an amazingly bestseller book. She often MCs, Contact in the Desert and all these big consciousness community presentations. And she really was addressing what was going on in her, that she was noticing as she traveled around and talked to so many people. Like there's been like a sharp right turn, in terms of what was happening with Ascension and what we were expecting. And so a lot of my work has been around, the idea of the mythos of like, what do I feel my storyline is to the Ascension? And I always kind of found it a bit divergent from what was a little bit more mainstream. And so when Alexis was putting the panel together, she was going back and looking to speak with people who were coming at this from a more divergent standpoint. I don't know if we're still live because it looks like we're cycling here. Okay. Could you still hear me?
No, we're all good. I was just trying to get rid of my echo. Yeah, we're all good. Yeah.
Okay, because if both screens were cycling, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to keep on talking. So it was because of this, the way I was looking at Ascension in the first place, that I think she invited me onto the panel along with Cynthia Sue Larson, PM Atwater, and Whitley Stryber. And that is, for many of those in my community have been following my work over the years in the podcast that, you and I both did with the Akashic Academy and the Akashic Network, as well as the other work that we've been doing for about 4 years or more, like kind of in our communities, is that I always saw the Ascension as expansion. And I really refer to it a lot as expansion, because I really didn't see it as this sort of up and down, like we're kind of going up into dimensions or whatever. I saw that we were expanding, like the earth was expanding. And when you follow the work of a lot of geophysicists, one in particular, I love her work, but it's hard to find anything in English, is Giuliana Conforto. She's Italian. Geophysicist, but she talks about she shows a lot in the studies that quantum physicists have been doing on the way the earth is like pulling and expanding, and just this whole field around Gaia is expanding. And so I think a lot of what I'm seeing in terms of like, let's go back and look at what some of the navigating the Ascension, and what are some of the navigating blocks that we probably, in looking at a lot of your audience, as well as a lot of, people that I've encountered, it's a little refreshing. Like, let's relook at this thing, because we're not really that far off course, but I think, what I like to call the fungus, which is sort of the negative aspects in the realm, really had to throw a curveball, because we were just like on this expansion track and it was losing control, right? So it needed to throw a curveball, and in throwing that curveball, we have to address that. It's like war. It's like in your war games, your opponent's going to try to do something that's going to throw you off, and you got to go back and kind of reassess the war theater, like they say, and then respond to it. And I think it's what we have to do in our community as well.
And do you think like Ascension 2 can be that whole, like the basics of the Ascension? Can you hear me okay now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. The basics of Ascension is that one of the things is we start responding rather than reacting, like being aware of everything. So we respond to things rather than just laid out react in like a primitive sort of form.
Right. And I think that's been one of the shifts, Rhonda, is that before we were reacting, many people were like, okay, this was happening out in the larger cosmos. And then we were sort of reacting, be it, to that of alien, contact, or AI, or whatever the fungus, a lot of people call Illuminati controllers, everything I refer to as a fungus, because in my remote viewing sessions, I've seen this thing that's very fungoid. It's just the way it is working within our culture is very much like a fungus, which is why it doesn't surprise me that we just went through this whole pandemic, because the only thing that a fungus is really going to know what to do is what's at the core of its nature. And it went back and created a set of environments that is, which is, is descriptive of its nature, right? It stopped playing the war games in a way that we as humans wouldn't recognize it but it was frustrated. And so it just came full out and began to exhibit the real aspect of what it is. So yes, where we are now is it's learning to be proactive and think what's next before it comes to us. And that's going to be through a lot of our intuitions and things like that. And so it's like going back in and reprogramming ourselves, because we're all programmed. Like, let's face it, you live in this matrix. You were programmed from the day you came out the womb. And the biggest thing has been to reclaim or restore our consciousness to the divine nature in the field of all consciousness, so that we can have a more innate response. Like, we can get ahead of stuff because the signals come in and we are like, that's what's getting ready to happen. So let's respond. I found that a lot with my relationship with Gaia, my former show, Conversations with Gaia, and what Gaia was doing from mid 2019, starting around July. She really started forecasting every week what was coming next. And I was sharing it a lot with the community, and she forecasted from August of 2019 right up to the Tuesday before March 13th, when the world basically went into lockdown, exactly what was coming down to the date. You go back and look at those shows. She's saying we got 48 days. We have 36 days, and every date brought it right up to March 13th. Now, she started this back in the fall of 2019. So what that told me is that it wasn't that I was any more special than anyone else, but that I was picking up the signals from the logos of the planet. She's sending these things out. So we all can pick these things up and start thinking, I'm being told something's getting ready to happen. It doesn't matter if the rest of the world doesn't see it like that. Or you may talk to others and they're like, well, no, my information is saying this, or my information is saying that. You got to go with what your information is saying, because the ascension is not a group thing. Ascension, expansion, whatever you want to call it. It's not a group activity. We will collect as a collective. On the other side, when we look back, we'll see it as a collective experience. But in order to get to that place where we're going to look back, it is absolutely an individual journey. And I share this a lot because I never understood it when I was like actually in the church, in traditional religion, because I come out of a family where my grandfather was an archbishop. So we were in church all the time. And so though at the very early years, I kind of like rebuked a lot of it, like, oh my God, when I get grown, I ain't never going to church again, But so it's a lot about the organized religion but there's a lot of information there, just like there's a lot of information across the board in all kinds of studies, right? And one of the things that, is said, it's easier for a man to go through the eye of a candle than the rich man to gain heaven, or something like that. And I never really understood that. I mean, like, on the surface, but I'm like, that's a really kind of deep thing to think, that we can get through an eye of a needle, but it's easier to do that, which seems like it's easier in our culture just to make a little money and get to heaven, And what I began to understand over this last year is that scripture just keeps on coming up, and it means it's absolutely a singular journey. So ascension is this absolute singular journey, that the only way you're going to actually ascend is that you have to go through the eye of that needle, that very specific portal, a very specific point yourself. And everybody has their own eye of the needle. It's not like this one eye. We all have our individual portal. But when we get through it, we're like in heaven, paradise, Shambhala, the new world, whatever we want to call it. We're there collectively together. But to get there, we had to get through our own individual portal. And I feel like that's exactly what's going on right now. So in navigating the ascension blocks, which is will be coming up, and I invite everyone to come in and hang out with me, because there's going to be a lot of good stuff going on in there. I'll be talking about some very specific things that I've done and what I'm suggesting people can do in order to have this singular experience of the ascension or the expansion.
Okay, can you give us just a peek of one of the things you might want us to do?
Sure. So one of them is something that came up a while back. I was listening to the interview of Catherine Austin Fitts. Now, she's actually an economist and very well known in the financial community, Wall Street, all that kind of stuff. And my background, my advanced degree work is in banking. I studied it at the University of London in the School of Economics. I'm always very interested in economics and stuff like that. So I follow people that are not necessarily in, the New Age community. But she was saying something, and it really hit me. She was talking about the times that we were living in. This was a couple of years ago, I think, when she had this, maybe about a year or so ago, when she had this particular talk, where, we're living in times that you almost have to have already decided. You have to, she actually says you have to already decided what you're doing, where you're going, and already basically be there. And if you haven't done that yet, it's really a little bit too late. And this is interesting hearing this from an economist, right? Because she was really talking as if she was in the New Age community, in that she said one of the things that she had to ask herself quite a while back, she said, I was a very wealthy woman and I had a lot of possessions and I was doing very, very well. But something hit me that this realm is not what it's. We have these two layers. You have reality, and then you have this pseudo thing that we often think of as the matrix or something like that, which is what she was referring to. And so she realized that she wanted to be in reality. She didn't want to be in this pseudo thing that was very artificial. So she asked herself a question, and that question was, what do I choose? Do I choose life or do I choose freedom? And she said, I realized I chose freedom. And at that point of choosing freedom, she said every decision she made was completely different than every decision she had been making, which before was she was choosing life. And that's an interesting twist of words, right? But what she ultimately discovered, and this was the same path that I had walked starting about maybe 10 years ago, when I specifically understood that I wanted to just be free. I wanted to be an independent, sovereign being. I didn't want it to be dependent upon the system. If everything went to hell in a handbasket, like my grandmother used to always say, I still wanted to be able to survive. And so that meant I had to start making some different decisions, which began to separate me from the matrix. And so when you think about, so I'm inviting everyone to really think about this. What are you going to choose? Because when you choose freedom, you actually make way different decisions than when you choose life. Because everything in this matrix is designed to cause us to be fearful of death. That's what it's doing. So no matter how studied we are, no matter how connected we are to the universe and if you're still actually not consciously realizing, because this is what we don't know that we don't know about ourselves. This is the area I'm talking about. It's like discovering that you're still going to be making these decisions based on, I want to survive. I want to live, and and the system manipulates us through the death matrix. So it's like you can say, well, I'm not really fearful of dying. Okay. Many people can say that, but interestingly enough, we're still making decisions out of life or death type of things. And so the last 18 months, that's been the really amazingly powerful trick that the fungus has played on humanity. It's put us in a position of making a decision about life, not freedom. So when we're confronted with freedom, it's very difficult to make the choices that are more empowering to those of us who have been walking in this community, because we just didn't know that we didn't know, right? That these are actually two different constructs that the fungus is expert in manipulating us around.
Yeah, it's like our attachment to things and getting things and accumulating things is like life, right? That's like we're like a squirrel running around collecting all our nuts.
Yeah.
Then we forget to look and see and have that freedom that, we can just explore the forest.
Yeah. And it's also
as long as we go.
Right. Exactly. So it's this connection to things, but like, and even goes to more, even like to things like our connection to comfort, our connection to ease. A big one for many people, and it's just because the way this we've been programming in this matrix, is it's it's our connection to not wanting to have confrontation, not wanting to seem overly vocal about something, not wanting to sort of be seen as a person is a little bit kind of out of place. These are also connections that sort of keep you connected to the life choice versus the freedom. Because freedom takes a spirit of revolution. You got to almost be a revolutionary. You have to be a person that doesn't mind confrontation. You don't mind stepping outside the box. And it doesn't mean that you got to carry a banner and be in a group, but you could be a quiet revolutionist, right? So when you're confronted with something that you just don't agree with, you can quietly still stand and just say, well, no, I'm not going to kind of go with that, because that's just not in alignment with my desire for sovereignty and freedom. And for a lot of people, that is still very difficult to say. So it's like these almost, it really kind of goes into the psychosis of the collective unconscious. This is where the fungus gets us rooted, in this area. And this is the kind of thing that, I'll be talking more and more about, but exploring this idea of how to disconnect in ways that we can, because that's where that ascension, is happening. Like back to the eye of the needle. It's on this individual, and each eye of the needle is our own portal around what is that hardest thing. What is one of the hardest things on the unconscious level of you as a human being? That's where the fungus is going to have you every single time. And that's where the holdback happens.
Yeah. Shannon Marie was asking, she wants to know your theory on all the mental illness going on. Is that struggle that we're like experiencing? Is people sort of like, like, is that they're waking up and but they're not getting it, or they're waking up and other people are thinking they're crazy, or what do you think?
I think that's a really good question too. It's a perfect question because it does speak to the collective unconscious. So I think it's a number of things, but a few things I could point the direction into, opening the conversation about it would be, one is like cognitive dissonance. Well, cognitive dissonance doesn't mean that the person is just zombified or just 100%, just doesn't want, wants to be in refute of the obvious. It's that when you get tied into a collective way of thinking, and it could just be something very basic, like, let's do a popular one, okay? Is the earth flat or is the earth round? Okay. If you're really invested in the earth being round, and that's all you ever have known, and you never even thought about it being anything else than that, and maybe your work is in the sciences, and you need to have that construct of the earth being round to continue to do your work, and all of a sudden somebody brings something up and it does make sense, like it may be like way in the back of your mind, you might even thought, I've always kind of wondered about that. What happens in the brain is that in the psyche, more in the psyche, is that you don't have any place for it. And the minute you don't have any place for something, the ego jumps in and replaces it with something. And so that something is generally whatever your core belief has always been. And so when that happens over a period of time, if you keep on having these things that keep on popping up, like we've had in our culture, the pandemic and this, and then mask, and then social distancing, and then this and that, and things that we were told about germ theory before seem to be changed. And people's brains don't have any place for all of these different constructs that are popping up. And they haven't been doing any of the work because they didn't know that there was work to do. They've just been living their lives, like choosing life, the idea of choosing life, just trying to provide for themselves and their family and all this kind of stuff. And so it's like the 101 monkey theory. So everybody is going through this. And as a collective, the collective unconscious, what Jung talked about as the collective unconscious, we're all on a frequency level tied into this. And when that happens, collectively, you move into this space where you begin to sense that I'm not the only one here confused. Other people are confused. And that confusion, you don't know what to do with it. It's a frequency, it's an energy. And unless you stop and really start connecting with communities and with ideas that can help you sort that out, it does begin to represent itself as this form of mental illness, because it really is. Because you don't really know what to do. And when that happens, you have anxiety, you have fears that mount even more, you have physical sensations that begin to happen in the body, because all of that type of stuff is very real in its nature in the body. So you have those kind of things. And then if people are already taking maybe some medications for certain things, and then this anxiety pops up, and that is not, it doesn't go along with the medications that they're taking proper, you know what I mean? So, the body just starts spinning out. And I think that a lot of it, that sort of this mid-level mental health issues that are going on is a lot of that type of stuff. And by mid-level, because you have people that have always been on either end of it, right? That have been a little bit more suicidal, and they've just been trying to manage it. So it doesn't take much for their psyche to start spinning out and saying, oh my God, what's going on? And so, yeah, I believe that if we want to look at things that we can heal ourselves and help others heal, I think in that range right there, to begin to help people look at that and realize that we're not by ourselves, but it's going back to choosing life or freedom. And for me, I chose freedom. So in choosing that, I've also decided that I have to begin to build my own story. I've got to decide what's going on in this realm for Robyn. What is that mythos? And then connecting to that, it becomes, you can tie into a deeper belief system on a DNA level, like at the core, the root core of who you are as an individual. And when you ground in that, you have everything with Gaia, everything with the planetary logos is there to meet you, because that is where reality is. And you're not in the overlay any longer. It's like when you go and you sit underneath a tree, or you sit on a patch of grass, and you find it so harmonizing and healing. Well, that's because you've actually connected to reality, and you removed ourselves from the false matrix that says, oh, we'll just go have a massage. Not to say that having a massage isn't grounding. Of course it can be, but it can be superficial as well, right? Or just burn a candle. Well, if you don't really know why, or the candle's not beeswax, let's say it's just paraffin, well, you're not getting the benefiting ions that comes from a beeswax candle. So it's like removing ourselves from the sort of the artificial things that we do and try to replace it with the intuitive things that are coming from the logos of the planet. So that would be kind of where I would start addressing that question. And that's a very complex question. So we could spend the whole show on it, of course, because I've only begun to address maybe a few ideas around it. But thank you. Yeah.
Kathy Donnelly, I'm going to put it, it's a big one. It says, I'll read it from my screen here. Sorry. She says, sometimes the universe removes things we are attached to help us with their path. At the time, we might not see them as a blessing, but looking back, we see it was needed to be done. It could be a true blessing, and to be grateful. And that's kind of true.
It's so true, Kathy. And I think that that's where we all are right now. We've been here for the last 2 years, and so much has been feeling like it's been taken away from us. And it's like, well, why? And it can create anxieties and stuff. But I do believe 100% that humanity is on a trajectory to break out of this matrix and be in the real reality, the real world, the world that the plants and the animals still exist in. Because, when we look at timelines, we're definitely on different timelines than, even our pets that we look at and we care after. We think that we're in the same dimensional space, but we're not. They're very much connected to the vibrations and the messages that come from the logos. They're very much connected to what's happening with the sun and the moon, and so they are living in a completely different dimensional space and timeline than we are, but they overlap, which is why we can have these similar experiences. And I think the more we begin to go back inside ourselves and start having our own natural responses to stuff, and don't care whether or not it's popular, because it's not going to be. So just set yourself. Right now, it's not going to be popular because it's going to be counter to the script that the fungus is giving us. And my talk with Alexis is really going to be about this, really going in and let's talk about what this fungus is. Let's look at it directly. Let's see what it's been doing. The natives have called it Wetiko, and this is a part of their for thousands of years. They've called it a virus. And it's interesting, when I remote viewed a number of years back and saw it, I saw it as a fungus, and it wasn't until I came across the work of Paul Levy about a year ago that I even discovered that there was a thing called Wetiko, and that the natives have talked about it for centuries.
Grows in the dark, in the absence of light, right? That's mainly what.
Yeah, and what's interesting is it is a form of darkness, but it's also a form of light. This is what's really tricky about Wetiko, is that it can represent itself as light as well, like as a solution. And that's what's happening right now with this pandemic. To some people, what the fungus is offering, it seems like solution. It's like the light. It's like, that's what's going to give me life. And to others of us, we don't necessarily see it like that. We may see it as darkness, see it as something that's not going to give me what I want. And that's where it's very tricky. It can be, which is why it exists in the psyche of humanity, because it can be whatever it needs to be to address itself in a way that we won't see it as a negative for us. So it's tricky.
And I go back to the tree world and all the mycelium below us, which connect us to Mother Earth. So it's almost like something that's layered on top of that. And
you're right.
Trying to overlay on top of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because the mycelium network, I've been studying herbology and roots this past couple of years now. I've always had an interest in it. And it was one of the things that Gaia really led me to understand her offerings better. And I remember my one of my teachers, she's in her 70s and she's been doing this for like 50 something years. And she told a story that the ancients and the indigenous cultures all over the world talk about, was a very dynamic thing in their world, is that when you're living in smaller communities and there's a sickness or something that comes up, or just maybe a general malaise or whatever, and the trees and the plants recognize that what's needed is not in that local geographic area, that trees had the ability to send out through the mycelium network that, my community needs thus and so, like it will instinctively understand what we need. And let's just call it something simplistic, like we need more vitamin K. We're just not producing enough of vitamin K. Let's just use that as an example. And so it can send through the mycelium network over to some trees that's in another completely different geographic area, and it can send back the vibration. And think about it very much like we know that there's frequencies around sound, like cymatics. We know that a lot of the biofeedback and quantum healing can produce tones that may be a tone of vitamin K, that when we listen to that tone, it's really healing. And this has been proved in quantum physics that it heals the body. So let's look at it like that. So the trees can actually bring back frequencies back through the mycelium network, back to that tree or group of trees that sent out the message. And then it can begin to produce in its own leaves and systems the vitamin K that's needed for the community, and so thus produce what's needed. And that's powerful. And I believe that when we as humans go back to being connected and living in the real world and kind of choose freedom and connect with the plants and everything that we need. And we will be able to send signals of health and well-being. Back to the question was asked earlier about the psychosis that's happening in humanity, that people are just starting to have more mental health issues. We can actually begin to send the healing vibrations to our fellow human beings, one back through that same network that we're being fed in the collective unconsciousness, a lot of these negative vibrations, realizing that's also a network that we can use, right? We could begin to use reverse populate it with things that will send the vibrations back through, but it won't be disingenuous because we've actually begun to use it in our own bodies. That's the thing. We have to create and induce the healing in our own body so that our psyche, our soul, which exists inside and also exists outside of us, can in a genuine way begin to populate the field with true healing.
Like we're doing right now. Like
yes.
Facebook and YouTube and all these are supposedly, bringing us down. But by just having this program on and sending it out, I think in our own little way, we're sending out like wake up calls and
Yep.
maybe little solutions for people that they can grab on, or just high vibing up the whole source. So when we're not watching stupid people do stupid things,
right,
and we're kind of upping it. So instead of violence, we can watch this news. Instead of mainstream news, we can watch programs that enlighten us. And it was interesting what you said about the plants. And I remember a friend who's a herbologist here was out with me in my woods in 19 in the fall, and she says all the mullein weeds, and you probably have mullein weeds now. She says they're everywhere, and my mentor was telling us it's because we may be having a hard lung year this year, and then the next thing you know, COVID shows up, and the mullein weed is so good for clearing up viral pneumonias and viral anything that's to do with the lungs. It's a great healer of all the lung issues and killing viruses and bacteria. And so it was interesting, even it reflected in my little environment here.
No, that's so true. That's very true. And one of the weeds, or because a lot of these things are considered weeds, that have come back in full force and are growing just about everywhere that it's native to is it's like periwinkle, but it was known as it was referred to also as a crown plant, and it's orange in color, and it has a lot of vitamin D in it. It really reacts to the sun, and it was known to really heal a lot of the immune system, a lot of things that really affected that by putting large doses of vitamin C out. And it's interesting that it's non pharmaceutical, or non-Latin, the common word, not the Latin word, is like crown plant. And then we were dealing with something called corona crown, virus. It's amazing. And so, that's a perfect example, Rhonda, of how Gaia already knew. Gaia was already putting herself in a position to send out in the previous year that we weren't even thinking about what was going on, plants that were there to be able to heal us for what we were confronted with that following year, and a lot of that is seen across the board in plants. I spent in January of 2020, I was invited to speak at the Consciousness Conference, Cosmic Conscious Conference in Australia. And, one of the things that I had the opportunity to do was spend time with many of the Aborigines in the Outback, and was something I always wanted to do anyhow. And this conference was actually in the Outback. So that was a beautiful thing. And I remember asking some of the indigenous, elders, like, what did they think about the burning of all the fields? So I was there when all the fires were happening, and much of the foresting was burning, and people were just bemoaning it. And it seems like such a terrible thing. But they said They said, and this was in January of 2020, before the whole big thing exploded on the scene, that, oh, it just means that Mother Earth is going to take the opportunity to send new plants out, because obviously we're going to need new plant medicine. And I just was like, whoa, like, that's really an interesting response, you know? But they just instinctively, and that's another example. Doesn't matter who started the fires, you know, but that when that happens en masse, that means that the Gaia, you know, the logos of the planet, can immediately create new medicine for us in the sprouts of the new plants that will inevitably begin to grow again. That's a powerful way for us all to be in connection to the planet. And that goes back to the idea of freedom and life. Because when we choose life, we think, oh, it's horrible, all the forests are burning, everything's burning, because we're looking at life and death, right? But if we look at things from a standpoint of freedom, that the ecology is free to remake itself, to rebuild itself, to become whatever it needs to be. It's not like a right or wrong or a life or death thing. Then you have a tendency, you have an opportunity to have different responses to that same event.
Yeah, it's renewal rather than destruction, and that's where we have, because man-made has stopped a lot of these natural cycles from happening, and it's always a little bit humbling for man, I think, when it just happens anyways. One way or another, it just happens anyways. You can't stop me, we're just going to burn, you know. That's normal.
Exactly. Yeah. Precisely.
It's a Gaia is so wise, I guess, and living from a perspective of freedom, we have to start noticing what's around us. I guess that's mainly one of the other things. Like animals, people are always striving to lengthen their animals' lives.
Yeah.
You know, we treat the cancer, we treat this, and what are we doing it for? They don't care.
Yeah, no, they don't. We're doing it for ourselves. We're doing it for ourselves. Our own sense of immortality, our own fear of aging, and, you know, not wanting to, or selfishness, not wanting to be without that loved pet, you know what I mean, that brought us so much calmness, or, you know, helped us soothe us of our own anxieties. And so, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and they live in the now, and that's why they're so happy, because they're not thinking of 2 weeks from now or what happened yesterday, or even like a few minutes ago. It's squirrel, and then they're gone, right? They're happy.
And I found also, when I started actually choosing freedom, it's so much easier for me to live in the present. I don't understand 100% why, but I can tell you it's something really freeing about that. You know, that idea of I've chosen freedom, I'm sovereign. And it's something that causes you to just be able to stay in the present a little bit more than you do when you're choosing life. That life thing, as soon as I say the word, just even the audience, just say, I choose life. As soon as you say that, almost immediately you hear the word death. Like in your head, you're choosing life, because the idea is that at some point you're going to die, you know, like, so it has this continuum that goes straight out, and your brain instantly almost takes you to that place. But when you say I choose freedom, wow, it just feels expanding. It's just like, I choose freedom. Your whole, everything, every point of your body just goes like out into the field. It's just amazing just to notice that.
Yeah. And I kind of look at death now as a graduation ceremony more than like, you know, people, it's ending of things. I think it's a graduation ceremony. We get to graduate from this plane and go on to something hopefully better, and transition into love and light is what I always think about. You're graduating.
Yeah. And I think that, and if you choose freedom as a part of your construct, then what you begin to see is that what you also begin to understand is that you can move into this space of not dying, because implicit in dying is that something has happened to you to take that choice away when you're choosing life, because you're always choosing to live. And so something is going to come in out of your control to take that away from you. And so just shifting to freedom, then what happens is that you can actually move into this space of choosing when you're going to walk out of this room and walk into that next room. And in that, then in fact, you haven't died. You've just simply transitioned into another space of your choosing. And I believe that's also a big trick of the fungus. The fungus has us into choosing life to make us think that death exists. And in fact, it doesn't exist in the way that this construct has artificially created, so that we have this response to it of trying to not have it happen, or if it does happen, we have some sort of control over it. But if you look at it that it's not even a real thing, and I can just choose at some point to move on, then all of a sudden there's no such thing as death. I mean,
you're just leaving the building. You're not leaving you.
Right, because on a higher level, we're basically plasmic, etheric substances of our soul that doesn't die. It's energy. We're electricity. It doesn't die. And on a higher level of our consciousness, we realize that. And so when you ever have had, any of us who've ever had a near-death experience, you understand that. You sit at that space where you're watching what's going on, and you realize in that moment, wow, that's just an avatar laying there. It's not at all me. And I know when I had that realization in my own life, it was stunning. It was like, wow, and so that's never left me. And I feel like that's the biggest hurdle for us to get over, is the trick that the fungus has played on it. And as soon as you really get that in your spirit, wow, it changes your whole dynamics of how you operate.
Yeah. And
I mean, think about it. We have and this may seem a little morbid, so I want you guys to hang in here with me because I'm going somewhere. But we're told that everything in this construct is just keeping us alive, wanting to keep us healthy. But when you wake up, you realize, fluoride in the water, GMO vegetables, just all this crappy stuff that's put out everywhere. Daggone well, they're not trying to keep you alive. They just want you to die slowly, to use up all your insurance, use up all the money. It's this thing of getting you to pay all the way to the grave. And when you realize, you think about, it's nothing about this is really trying to keep me alive. Then I found myself, this was years ago, I found myself asking the question, why does the construct make such a big deal about suicide? Like, why do they make such a big deal about that being so terrible and your soul goes to hell and it's not something that you should do? And when they're already trying to kill you, it seemed like it would just fit into their plan. And I really spent some time around that. And I talked to a few friends and philosophers that I know, and we really vetted this idea that possibly, I'm just this is for value logic, which I'll be also talking about when I do the navigating the ascensions. It's not, for value logic, for those of you who are not familiar with it, says that there's a yes, there's a no, there's a yes and a no, and there's neither yes or no. Okay, yeah. So this is exhibited a lot in quantum physics and quantum theory. And this has been proven that there is really more for value logic, but we're trained in two value. It's right or wrong, left or right, Republicans or Democrats, Trump or Biden, up or down,
mask or non-mask. Yeah.
Right. And it gets you pivotal around those. I got to make these two decisions. And so with the for value logic, it's this thing that also says that, so if it's only life or death, and the matrix is constantly getting you choose life, and they're making death be this terrible thing you don't ever want to choose while it's slowly walking down this road. Is it possible that when a person takes what we see as taking your life, they're really just exercising a form of freedom for their avatar and their soul self that wants to transition into another space of their own choosing? And by doing this, they're not trapped by the fungus in this life or death construct, which causes them to, in fact, not really die because they're not soul cycled and all this other stuff that's possibly happening when we fight it to the very end. Just something to think about, because it's considered like horrible. And I think, well, why does this fungus care about anything horrible that's happening as satanic, as the Satan pedophilic aspect of it anyhow? It's like the stuff that's happening is really pretty bad. So just something to think about and go more into this for value logic concept of it.
Well, Robyn, that's been fascinating. And where can we get into your class for navigating the Ascension
I'll
model?
make sure that I give you the link for it, but it's we'll have the link. It's through Alexis Brooks is she has a school, a platform, an academy, and that's where you'll be able to tie in and come on in and join. It's going to really be some really good people that she's had in this in dialogue, and it's going to prove to be, hopefully, we're going to really get in and do the work around how to understand these blocks and navigate them. And it comes up in I think mine is December 18th. It's a Saturday.
Yeah, and I put the link in the program description here, so people should be able to get it there. So December 18th, that's excellent. That's great.
Yep,
and,
definitely.
And you have another thing, Wanderlust 2022.
Yeah, I've been invited to participate in that. I oftentimes, through this pandemic, have been invited to do these types of online workshop, community courses, and what have you. And it's all around my art mythos, which I explained earlier, which is learning how to tell your story. And the easiest way to tell it is visually. It is so, and people think, oh, I can't draw. I can't. It's not even about that. Think about all the cave drawings, all of the petroglyphs and everything, all the symbols that you see all around you. And sometimes they look very childish, but how powerful they are and how they've endured time. And we all have a relationship to symbols and scribbles and movements and things that somebody else may look at it and be like, oh my goodness, what's that? But it actually has been activated at the DNA level in you. And it does help you begin to tell your stories and reconnect to who you are on a very cultural level. And by cultural, I don't mean the group or tribe that you have been born out of, but by cultural, I mean it more in the Abrahamic way that Moses thought of when you think of experience. The experience, that 40 years in the desert, create a cultural experience for Moses that told him he can survive just about anything. And that's what he taught in the last 40 years of his life, was how to be empowered in freedom to be able to survive anything. And so cultural, it means your own personal experiences and using those experiences to fund and fuel your future, your current choices and what your future decisions are going to be. So it's about creating that. And so that's what a lot of the work that I do. And it comes out in journaling, art journaling, as well as written. I'm really pretty good at helping people to come at it whichever way you're most comfortable. But the root of it is to get into your own personal experience and creating your own personal mythos. One that your spirit that's come in here to do the work really is relating to, more so than your family, where you grew up, where you came, what family you were born into, what religion that family kind of thrusted upon you, etc.
Cool. Okay, so now since Bex isn't here, I have to give you your 3 questions.
Okay.
So, first question is the easy one. What's your favorite crystal, or do you have a favorite crystal right now you're working with, and why do you like it?
I do, and it's cinnabar. It's actually a stone. And Gaia gave that to me in 2019 when she started really showing me what was coming for our future, in the time period that we were going to be in, and that time period is now. And she started showing me the power of cinnabar, and what it reminded me of is cinnabar is it's like a mercury, if you think about it, but it's not like liquid mercury that we're told, it's so bad for us, the silver and stuff like that. But it's a powerful healing property. And the ancient Chinese medicinal practitioners understood the power of cinnabar. And there's a lot of very old recipes using it for healing, but it also is something that the Asians, when you talk about the dantians, the 3 dantians, being the lower chakra, the heart chakra, and the pineal, the upper glands, the lower one is called the cinnabar field. Actually, interestingly enough, the root chakra is called the cinnabar field. And so when Gaia started showing me the connection of the cosmic womb to the actualized womb in our bodies, and that it's a space that we create from, et cetera, et cetera, I started realizing that the cinnabar, it's possible for us to use the properties of it as a really incredible healing balm. And so basically what I would do with cinnabar is just, I would take a terminating crystal. I put my cinnabar down, and I have a ruby on one end and a two terminal crystal on the other. And I lay it on a piece of selenite, and I let it charge like that. And then I would take the ruby and put it in water, and then, let it sit for a while and then drink that water. And it was energizing the water through the properties of the cinnabar. And what was interesting is, as I was full into this experience, I had a lucid experience in which a black jaguar, came to me and led me into a temple that looked really like a Mayan temple, and took me deep into this temple. And there were a lot of healing things that were going on around in there, but I really didn't understand it. I just knew that this was some sort of healing ritual. And then later on, I came across the work of this British anthropologist, and he does a lot around the Mayan culture and putting the symbols of the Mayan culture together. I can't remember his name right now, but if I remember it, I'll make sure to give it to you. But and what he discovered in his work and going into one of the major temples is this long staircase that goes all the way down in this temple. And when they first opened the temple, like very much like when they first went to the pyramids, they went down, the archaeologists went all the way down this staircase to the bottom. And this temple had something to do with the jaguar. It had, the name of it was something around the jaguar. And at the base of it was a shell. It was like a large clamshell. And in the shell was cinnabar.
Huh.
So, and it was interesting how Guy had made that connection a year and a half earlier in a lucid experience. So yeah, the cinnabar, I invite everybody to check into cinnabar.
Now I'm going to check out cinnabar. Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
The second one was, have you had some recent experiences with UFOs? I'm going to just put it that way.
Yeah. Well, I actually have had a recent experience. So going back to probably about April of this year, March or April of this year. I want to say probably April. I have it in my journal. I write all this stuff out. But here again, I do a lot of work in the lucid field. So it's like I'm very much conscious of what I'm experiencing, but I'm more like in an alpha state, and so when I was in this state, it was probably, I would say maybe 3 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning or something like that. And I had to sort of waken up into this lucid field where you're kind of looking around the room, that you're seeing what's going on, but at the same time, that you're still almost like in this state of meditation. And I was awakened. As I opened my eyes, I saw the face of just a large face form in front of me. Of what I recognize as the black mantis. And I had a lot of experiences with the mantis when I was younger, a little girl. It seemed like they came to me all the time, and they came out of the light poles. And my very good friend of mine, and I know a fellow guest that was on recently, Barry Littleton, we talk a lot. And I reached out to him and I was like, Barry, this is a while back. Because he was the one who even told me that I was an experiencer up until, and I think maybe this is about 5 or 6 years ago, I was talking to him. And I knew that I had seen UFOs, and I knew there was a lot of this going on in my realm. I never really thought of myself as an experiencer, but he's so adept in all of this. And he started telling me, yeah, these things you're telling me, Robyn, you're having a lot of the shadow memories and stuff like that. So when I opened myself up to it, then it popped into full experience where I was fully experiencing these encounters. And so with the black mantis, they really connect a lot with the logos of the planet. They're like the octopi. They're almost gatekeepers for Gaia. And they interact with all of the various extraterrestrial beings. They kind of even go in and out of a lot of the portals. They're, like I said, they're kind of like the gatekeepers for the portals, very much like the Yeti are the gatekeepers on the planet for a lot of the elementals and what have you, that kind of go back and forth in all the various Gaiac portals. So anyway, yeah, this large face was there. And I thought, okay, this is interesting. So what are you showing me? And immediately they popped into what looked like an operating room. And they were there in these white lab coats, very traditional. And there were these beds that were laid out, and they were like hovering beds. They weren't attached to things, but there were many of them in the room. These beds were all over, and they were all over the place. Probably in my field of vision, I could see at least, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 of them working. And they showed me this procedure that they were able to do to help begin to remove graphene oxide from our bodies. And this was before all that, really, a lot of that graphene oxide stuff was really coming on, like what's in the shots and things like that could possibly be connecting us to AI, the black goo thing, that could be connecting us to Wi-Fi signals and things like this in this transhumanism movement that I think a lot of what's going on with these shots. But anyway, I think the goal is more transhumanism than it is depopulation, but there's going to be a certain amount of depopulation because our bodies have to be able to take this substance and be able to maintain its life. Here again, choosing life or freedom. Well, anyway, they showed a technique that they're able to actually begin to remove, because and all this was going on telepathically. So I was sort of sitting there as an observer, pretty much like if you were like in a classroom watching these techniques happening and you were being explained what was happening. That's kind of where I was in the theater there. And I was being shown that this is in all of our bodies, going all the way back to a lot of practices, but moving even currently in with the chemtrails and what have you. So there's years and years of smaller particles, but what was happening is we weren't building up the graphene oxide in our bodies quick enough, because our bodies, being these amazingly incredible structures, was constantly getting rid of it. And we were getting rid of it, and we were also transmuting it. Because as we were becoming more crystalline and we're actually becoming less carbon, and we're in this expansion process, our bodies are able to metabolize and pass this stuff out more easily. And so all that was coming in from the chemtrails and the GMO and everything that has all this same stuff in it wasn't happening. So they had to accelerate it into a lot of these jabs and what have you. So they were saying that everyone could use this regardless of whether or not you are vaccinated or unvaccinated. It's not even the issue. It's that in order to remove a lot of this from their body, there is this technology to do it. And so at that time, I was asked, well, who would you like to have this process? So I was there for a long time. I went through a laundry list. I thought all the people I knew that had gotten the jabs, and I thought all the people I knew that were suffering from whatever, and they were very patient. They went through each person, and they looked at me and they said, well, you haven't asked for yourself. And I thought, oh yeah, I guess I hadn't. Okay, well, yeah, they said, do you want? And I'm like, yeah. So I laid there and they did it, and I literally physically felt in my body the technology that they were doing that was moving this stuff around. And ultimately, it had an absolute physical sensation. And so one of the things that, I was told, and I invite anybody who's listening to this broadcast, is that the Manas have invited you, if you just simply want to have your body scanned in this process done and removed, you just have to connect. You simply have to just ask to connect. A lot of times it happens at night, sleeping. You won't even, there will be some sensation, there'll be something left over that you'll know that it happened, but it's not about the encounter. It's not about the fear. They're really beautiful beings, just like, I've had the connection with the Yeti and experienced them to be such beautiful beings that we're taught fear. That's another programming thing. We're taught to fear a lot of this because they're actually our brethren, and they're here to help us and heal us. So yeah, you can simply ask the mantis, and they're very happy to perform this and really help move a lot of this stuff out the body. So yeah, that was my most recent encounter.
That's awesome. I think I'll be asking the mantis to do that, because they're always a favorite of mine.
Yeah, They're good.
And the last one is the hardest question, apparently, is if you have a theme song for your life right now, what would it be?
Wow, that's a really hard one. For me, it would be this total immersion and understanding of a popular song and a familiar one, and one that I loved when I was younger. And I think a lot of us will be able to identify with it. The Fifth Dimension song, The Age of Aquarius.
Oh, yeah.
That just runs through my head all the time. And I thought back then, why they call themselves the Fifth Dimension, number one.
Oh,
How deep is that, right?
Yeah, it gave me the goosebumps.
And then their song, The Age of Aquarius, and this thing was out, what, in the 70s or the late 60s or something like that?
60s, I think. I don't know.
Oh my God, a powerful song. So that's my melody.
Oh gosh, the Fifth Dimension. Wow, they were really ahead of themselves, weren't they?
Way ahead of themselves.
Way ahead. Well, thank you, Robyn. I have to announce the winner who is going to win a session with Bex, and it's Alice Heath. So thank you, Alice.
Yay! Awesome.
And whoever shares out the most this week, or whatever other kind of process we use, will win a session with. Oh, let's see. It'll be Teresa, I believe. Yeah. So next week will be.
That's awesome.
So,
and anyone who wants to follow more of my work, it's really simple. RobynMcclendon.com. I know you can put it down in the comments, but it's RobynMcclendon.com. So that's my website, and mostly everything that I'm offering can spin off from there. So yeah.
I put that up in there too, and I really appreciate you coming on today.
Oh,
and
I always love hanging out with you. And I'm sorry I'm missing Bex and Teresa, but I love them, and we all hang out and know each other and stuff. So it's always a fun time, Rhonda.
I know. I'm missing them too, and but I'm hoping they're feeling better and getting some rest. And, I always say that holidays are great if you're a man or a kid, but it's always hard on us women. I don't know why. I just find there's a lot of expectations placed on in our lap. So I shouldn't say that.
No, why not? But that's a part of that's a part of the mythos. And that's a part of your mythos and a part of many of ours. So that's what we get to say these things. It's not right or wrong. It's that fourth value logic, right? It's like we can enjoy our families. We can love our families. We can have a great time. We can also say, wow, that was a lot of pressure put on me.
Canadians are famous for saying, no.
Exactly. I love it.
Thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Robyn. And everybody have a great week, and we'll see you next week. I believe next week it's December 5th. Michael Lozier is going to be on. So he's going to talk about, I think, attraction, the law of attraction.
Wow, that's
famous
awesome.
For that. So it'll be a great one. So please join us next week as well.
Thanks for having me, and thanks everybody who joined us in the chat and what have you. I appreciate the questions.
Thanks. So just